conversation takes place every day on the fire, about 20 minutes to half hour, depending upon the situation and how big the incident is. We try to capture that in this form. So there's two different pieces of this form. The stuff you see in blue, which would basically be all of these values at risk here, that's where you guys play a huge role. And we'll talk more about that in a second. And then this red stuff over here, firefighter risk, that's the 7 influencers I was talking about. So how do the why, the values we're trying to protect, intersect with the things that could get us while we're doing that work? So let's take a look at an example of where we get this information. You'll see columns 2 and 3 where it says reads and AAs. That's the stuff that we really need to have you guys drill down into. But that doesn't mean your responsibility or your inputs end right within that box. It's important to have you in there for the entire conversation, because when we start talking about large fire growth, you might know something that can really augment what the FBANs or LTANs or SOPLs are talking about. So this form is a great way to capture it, but it's about that conversation and free-flowing thought processes as we go through the daily chat. So here is an input that we got when we arrived at the Lick Creek fire. Working with Terry, they had a list of probably 60 different values at risk that were in the WFDAs. And for this SRA process, what we wanted was the critical ones. We know there's 60 really important ones, but break it down for us. What's critical? So he took a look at his list of 60 and came up with this shorter list. And he color coded them between catastrophic, critical, and then some moderates. Of course, the moderates ended up falling out as well, but we'll talk about how we can use these lists. On the far left of the column, you'll see it says mission on top. That helps us know which mission we were talking about as earlier defined for these 60s. But the severity of impact, that's a really important column that we're going to talk about in just a minute. So taking what Terry put together for us, this is how the chart ended up getting populated. So right here on column 2, you can see the top values at risk, the top most critical things that were listed. And you can tell right now, none of the moderates made the list. Where does this severity of impact come from? Severity is putting it all aside. When a fire hits the community of Anatone, for example, how bad is it going to be? And there's a 4 different level matrix: catastrophic, critical, moderate, or negligible, with consistent definitions of those terms. So Terry sat down with us and worked it through. For each of those values, those critical values, he came up with a severity of impact as to how bad of a day that would be for the value. Then the FBAN was also in the conversation, the fire behavior analyst, and he came up with the probability of impact. So here is how bad would it be when it were to occur. And our FBAN helps us know if it's even possible that it could occur. So probability is on a 5 rating scale from almost certain to likely, possible, unlikely, and rare. So what happens there is when you've got those 2 tidbits of information, it auto-populates a risk rating. Then we get together with operations and talk about this probability of success piece. So knowing the community of Anatone and the fact that it would be catastrophic, knowing what kind of maybe fire defensibility you have around it, or interventions we can put in place, from wrapping and hose lays and fuels projects, brushing. Operations, what's your chance that you think we can protect that value? And in this case, they believed we were 60% successful. We could be 60% successful in protecting that. So that's how that conversation looks on the blue half of the chart. And we go through that for each of the individual values that are critical. When it comes over to the red side of the graph, all of the values are lumped together in one conversation. So when we're looking, for example, at the medical response and extraction, it's not just talking about the community of Anatone, work around that community. It's talking about everything that we are doing to protect all of those values under this mission 2 of direct and indirect containment line. So these are big lumpers over here. The blue half is actually splitters. And what we're finding is this form is probably going to see some changes at the end of the beta test because people want to just have a linear response all the way across this. So a little bit of input needed from the field on that one for sure. But I do want to just quickly draw your attention down to box 13 here. This stuff gets populated off of the blue and the red up upper parts of the chart. So column 6 basically gets averaged to pop down here for the mission probability of success. So when we think about this on a larger scale, a strategic scale, trying to protect all of those values while we're installing direct and indirect containment line for this fire, we believe that we're going to have a 74% chance of success. Same thing over here with the red factors. All of these in column 11 get aggregated to figure out our uncertainty level. So are we confident that we accurately assessed the risks that we're asking firefighters to undertake when it comes to this mission? And we were fairly confident. We were equal confident versus uncertain that we had captured that correctly. And then finally down here in the blue and the red chart, what that is essentially trying to show us in a less subjective, more tangible way is the juice worth the squeeze? So if you look, and the blue line is longer than the red line, the values, I hate to say, are worth more than the risk, but that's kind of where we're getting at. If it was a value that really wasn't going to be hurt or damaged by the fire, but yet there was a lot of hinkiness about what we were asking firefighters to do, and it was very risky, we may very well choose to not undertake that exact strategy. But we very well could still decide to do that because a short-term exposure or risk is better than months and months of trying to keep a fire from getting into things that we don't want to during an entire season. So that's not a go, no go. It's just helping inform the overall conversation. And then box 12 and 14 down here, what this is doing is really just capturing our thoughts. 12 focuses on the mitigations or controls to the risks and the hazards, and 14 is kind of a free-flowing summary. I know that's a lot to digest, but really this is the piece that you can help if a fire or ends up on your unit or you end up on someone else's unit with a fire. Here's what we would love to see for these strategic risk assessments. You know, what's the critical value at risk? What's the severity of impact when the fire would hit that value? And then eventually breaking it down by the geographic location and the mission with which it would fall into. And just some notes about that value. For example, looking at Oregon Butte Lookout and the communication tower, that's a historic lookout which serves as a rec residence, and there's also a pretty critical communication tower at that location. So that helps us understand why that is important instead of just listing something on a piece of paper. Another way that's really critical for us to see it, we joke about it, but it's true. Ops people are very spatial thinkers. They love things on maps, not so much charts. And so if you can capture where that value is and how critical it is to the local unit, that's helpful. So I call this the caterpillar map. It's basically showing the level of importance of each of those values and where the heck they land, so that we can give that to the division soups. We can even give it to the engines and the task force out in the field based on what you guys find out there to help us know areas we need to avoid, areas we need to focus on. And each fire might have a little bit different look to their spatial report or even their Excel type of version. So essentially, like I said, we had 12 teams that are out doing this all summer long, and it looks like it's going to be a very rigorous season to get input. What we want to do is gather all kinds of feedback from these teams. After every assignment, they're going to fill out some surveys. At the end of the year, they're going to fill out some surveys, and we're going to try to find themes or trends or gaps in what all 12 of the teams have seen over the entire season. This winter, we'll take all of that information and try to synthesize it, figure out how we're going to roll this out in 2022, hopefully at a larger scale, and hopefully through all different venues like this with the resource advisors, through incident management team trainings, through IC groups, through the IMRR process, all different sorts of ways. So I'm going to leave this right here. I do have a slide that shows our contact information. We just have a couple of minutes if anybody's got any questions that I could answer right now. I know I went through that really quickly. I think we're going to be doing another conversation in the future, but at least letting you know what's out there and how really important your role is in this entire risk assessment process. We start with those values that you provide us and then decide the strategy and tactics that we're going to use to protect what's important to you guys on the ground. I'll leave it there.
All right, we have a couple minutes before Jen and I have to run away to a meeting. So questions? go ahead, raise your hand or open your mic up and speak.
Lynn, there's a question in chat.
Yeah, we will send the PowerPoint out. I will try to just load it right now if Teams will let me. No, of course, Teams will not let me.
And there's also a process paper that talks in about 4 pages, all that stuff I was talking about that I'll have Lynn attach either to that email or to the chat later, just so you can probably keep up with the speed with which I was throwing words at you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I guess, while people are thinking of questions, I'll just say from my perspective, you know, I've been working with Jen and seeing her do the strategic risk assessment for just safety for years. And we've talked about it a few times, just about, hey, you know, that's how I think about a resource protection. Like, what is how severe is the damage going to be? What's the mitigation? How does it lower it? And then how's the probability of success of getting firefighters in there safely for that mission? And seeing this being implemented is, I think, a great thing for us as Reeds, but it also makes us pull things out and think about it first before we just run out on the line and start talking to firefighters. I mean, the line reefs and everything is really important, but as I just told the Reeds on this fire, I almost feel like that's in a PACE model, that's the last, that's E, that's the emergency of you're doing face to face. Here it is. Now we're protecting it, but we can be ahead of the game and getting it into the decisions of where lines are going, what's critical, what's not, and have those discussions early and often with ops, with safety, with the IC, with fire behavior, in order to be more strategic and have a higher probability of success in the long run than just chasing dozers around or chasing and trying to figure out what ops is thinking while you're on the ground and ops is up in the air. Having the conversations right as ops is making their decisions. There's a hand up. Melissa.
So we have a question by Julie. Do you see an abbreviated version of this for smaller fires?
That's a great question. We were struggling what to do with like type because of the ability to come out and coach with all of these 12 teams. Wanted to at least start with the type 1s and type 2s, but yeah, I see this down even further. Maybe it's something that can be used even for project types of work instead of exclusively emergency responses. But that's probably a little further downstream than 22, 23 it would be. Great question.
You know, that the bringing it into projects, I've actually seen it the other way. As I told Jen that I've done this sort of for my NEPA analysis, and I've even for archaeology done it in tables before. Here's the resource, here's the potential effect, here's the mitigation, and here's the final effect if the mitigations are put into place. And then this just comes into what in an emergency situation, what's the probability of success on that? Because it's not guaranteed that you'll be able to get the mitigation in or the full mitigation. And then also the probability of even being able to pull the mission off in a safe manner.
Thanks again, everybody, for your time. I appreciate you letting me hijack your meeting with what's going on out in strategic risk world. So I look forward to more conversation in the future.
All right, thank you guys. This one's going to be shorter. If you guys want to stick around and chat yourself and talk about the fire season, that'd be great. I'm going to have to leave and turn off my side. Hopefully that won't shut the whole thing down. I did start recording, but like about 15 minutes into it. So we have the end part, which might actually be it's the meat of what we would be doing as Reeds, but not the explanation. I am trying to route Jen into doing another presentation soon, so I'll try to record that one from the beginning and have the whole thing. So thanks, you guys. Everybody be safe out there. It is a wildfire season already, and it's only July. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Lynn. Bye.